True. Thank you. This is the professionals and tends to be the more technical, the more professional side of metadata. So looking forward to that. We did have some questions during the week. Drew, maybe start with that. And then there was also an interesting question that I got from someone during the week about intellectual property and controls on metadata. Drew, so I don't know if you'd like to talk to some of those, or would you like to leave them to the end?
I have included those first questions in the presentation after we discussed. I hadn't thought about the intellectual property one. Maybe we could do that as well, and then let us have a look where we get to.
Okay.
I've tried to cram as much as possible into this hour, but geez, there's a lot. So I think there's going to be a flow over into the executive side next week, but then we'll finally wrap it up. But anyway, have you got the right slide, Howard?
We can see it. Everything's good.
Good to go. And then I can't see at the moment. I can't see any hands or anything. So
okay, I'll take care of that. I'll take care of that.
Okay, so we've gone through the data manager side, where if you're the manager, or the things you got to do. We went through last week as a data citizen, a data steward, what are the things you do. We're going to look at today the essential concepts, the types of metadata, sources, the architecture, touch on the strategy, the requirements, and the meta model. And like I said, if there's overflow, we would touch on that next week. What I did want to do is say welcome to some of my old mates there, Margaret and Keith, and of course the old dragon in Scotland, Di. Hello, Di. We go back a long way. But anyway, remember what we did last week, and I haven't fixed Hercules to Atlas yet, but we said if you're the data manager, you got this massive weight on your shoulders that you've got to deal with. We also discussed the origins of metadata from those libraries of Alexandria, with the word Pinakos, the Greek word meaning table, and boards, which was actually the catalog for those 20 million libraries and manuscripts. And what is fascinating, as I said before, is this was built by Telemachus in the 3rd century BC, and it's amazing what was included in his coverage. The metadata that he included then is not that different to what we are using now, many years later. If you remember, I also said being a data steward, that was you've got so many balls that you've got to juggle with, but all things are doable with a little bit of time. We also discussed about what actually is metadata, and it is that data about data, and it's to provide context and structure and information about the data, so you can find it, you can understand it, you can use it. And it goes around the whys and the whens and the hows and the whats. And what we did last time with the stewards is we actually pinpointed on these things where they fitted in. But I'd like to confirm also that this thing, if you use this, you can drive out your strategy, you can drive out your requirements very clearly as well, because you would know who it is that you're trying to serve. You'd know what it is you're trying to serve them with. You want another scope, and then you would actually be able to build up the real deep contents of metadata itself, the whole program. I had a picture that I'd used, which I sent through to Debbie, but she told me it wasn't very good. So I went and I found a new one. And in my opinion, metadata is like a Rubik's Cube. There's so many moving parts, but when they do come together, when you get your strategy right, when you get your requirements right, when you get your stewardship and your ownership right, when you've got the right processes in place, when the right procedures, the right quality, it is magic. It's you can go there, you can fiddle it whichever way you need, but you can find what you're looking for. Okay, then the questions that came through, Howard, which you sent to me, and it was something I think somebody had sent to you
Yeah.
on LinkedIn. So the first question is the quality of the metadata. My answer to that is that if you design your metadata program properly, so you look at very definitely the requirements. So what metadata are you going to capture? And as part of that, what is the quality of that metadata? If you're looking at capturing something in the business glossary, what are the absolutely critical items and what are the rules that you need to apply around those? You know, if it's around completeness, if it's around accuracy, if it's around correctness, all of those things get built in. And then the metadata governance is exactly there to measure on an ongoing basis the quality of that metadata. You know, if somebody is taking shortcuts and capturing abbreviations, whatever else, that governance should pick it up. You can also apply standard data quality dimensions against the metadata. Most metadata repositories sit on top of relational database structures, and they are accessible. Sometimes a little bit of not as easy, but they are accessible to run your data profiling on it and highlight those things, as well as doing a visual check. But very definitely, you've got to design and build for quality. It's not going to happen by accident. And in a lot of instances, metadata is seen as a bit of a grudge activity. So there might be inclination to shortcut it, but don't. The metadata manager, the data stewards, the data owners, this is my colleagues, Margaret and Keith would know the example that I use, is that no retailer would willingly put meat that is past its sell-by date on the shelf because they know it's going to have major repercussions. They would not falsely advertise in the financial services industry a product that is not fit for purpose. But we are quite happy to surface data that is not fit for purpose. And metadata is one of those places. If you've got your metadata portal, it's at one place, hopefully that everybody comes to look up the meaning of a term, or to investigate where a piece of data comes from, or to investigate how data has been brought together to create a data product. And if that is not right, it's like trying to do online shopping when the catalog is not up to scratch. It just doesn't work. The second question is a little bit more of a complicated one. It's about the knowledge retention within the organization and for the benefit of data management maturity. If I take the first part, if we are using the business glossary and the data catalog correctly, if we are capturing in there all of the business terminology properly, we're capturing in there the calculations that are used, for instance, to calculate shrinkage or cost of sale or propensity or any of those things, those terms that are used often. If you're capturing those things in the glossary once, you are starting to retain that knowledge. You're not having to rely on people telling other people the wrong answers. How it would benefit data maturity, it could also do that because it does reduce the opportunity for error in misinterpreting what something means, or where it came from, or how it gets calculated, and how you present it. But very definitely, I see the glossary and to some extent the catalog has been a perfect place to retain knowledge about data, the use of data, the origins of data, and all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, this is not going to be used, for instance, to retain the knowledge about how the HR process works. The other question about work streams taking time to mature due to knowledge retention, I would agree that that is the case. But again, if you can start capturing the knowledge in here, if you can make sure that as part of your glossary, you are capturing your policy, your data management policy, your metadata policy, your data management practices, your processes, and all of those good things. If you're capturing them, at least you can refer to them and people can come back at a later stage. If you're going through high degrees of staff turnover, it's still a place where you can come to, and it gets instilled that this is the right way to do things. Howard, do you want to add anything to that, or would you like to carry on with the second question that you had?
Yeah, let's go to the second question. I'm happy with your answer there.
Oh, did I pass?
Yes.
Thanks. Just for the benefit of those who don't know, Howard and I go back many, many, many years, so we can actually pull each other's legs a little bit.
Around about 40 years now, Drew.
Well, AJ just turned 39, so yes, it would be.
Yeah.
All right, what was that question?
Okay, so the question was, and it's quite a tricky one in terms of trying to claim intellectual property on metadata. So, for example, if you build a data product and you have metadata to explain that data product, and someone builds a similar data product using your layouts and your metadata, do you have any claim on that? Now, the reason I ask it is because something like a data model and logical model, conceptual models, they are very similar to the drawings of an architect. So if an architect designs a building, um, just the fact that he did that, he has a level of intellectual property. So sometimes the question is, do I need to go and create a patent or to register that, or is there a default ownership from the person that created it? So that's some of the questions around this intellectual property or the metadata, and what level of ownership do we have when we build these things?
I'd probably turn that one on its head and say that there is an onus to ensure that you have captured metadata as to how that data product was built. So what data did you use? Why did you use it? Where did it come from? There's all of that. You could potentially protect the actual code. But I mean, if there's so much reuse of code happens these days within companies, that the chances of that sneaking out are fairly good. And it was a question I actually had asked AJ. My son AJ is a patent copyright lawyer, whether you can patent these kind of things. And he said it would take you so long to get the thing patented, that the product would almost be null and void by the time that happened. And then there is so much effort required to prove that somebody has willfully stolen your idea, so no, it's best you deliver early, gain that first advantage from something, because humans, none of us operate in unique isolation. All of us will have similar thoughts, and somebody will see something and they will enhance it. They will build on it. They probably won't just copy it, because that doesn't really serve as the purpose. But they would definitely build on. The next person will build on again. Also, we know for a fact that there's so much movement of people within industries and within companies. You cannot give somebody a frontal lobotomy when they leave your company to go somewhere else. They've got that knowledge already. They've got that idea. They're thinking of how it happened. So no, I think the answer to that is no. If you are concerned about it, keep your sensitive data sensitive. If your models are sensitive, keep those sensitive. But no, I don't think you can put in claim intellectual property on anything like that. I don't know what your thought is.
Yeah, I suppose I agree with what Matthew's saying in terms of the amount of time it's going to take you to prove that and to convince them. You're probably better off just going to the next version or moving along. So I think getting involved, trying to enforce that legal thing I think it's wastes a lot of your time, and you spending time on the wrong things.
And it's going to incur substantial cost.
Yeah.
That's if you could get a court date.
Yeah. I see Don's hands up. Yes, Don.
Hi, I think this is a very interesting topic because For me, this seems to straddle data ethics and copyright or intellectual property law. So, even if you can't, even if you could protect metadata, and you could think of metadata being, say, whether it's the way that you manage your data schema, or just data sets themselves. So if you think of telephone data, you could think of the location of its, not just the contents of a call, but the location and the details of the individual making the call. That kind of information could be valuable. And even if you can't, even if you could protect it, it's probably legally quite difficult to do so. So it's this overlap between between data ethics and copyright or intellectual property, and it's going to be interesting to see how, as the use of big data expands and the use and reuse of data expands, how mechanisms are created that on the one hand protect that balance protection of privacy and against intellectual property, and ensures appropriate reuse of data. So I think this is an area that's fraught with difficulty, but there may be technological advances that make it possible for these contractual problems to be resolved, or make alternative mechanisms of dispute resolution to be created eventually.
Thanks, Don.
Good. Whether at some point in the near future we shouldn't have another panel discussion with just Q&A, because I suspect there's more and more of these kind of questions that are brewing.
Yeah.
And we could actually send out a thing to say, right, submit the questions and then we'll do a panel.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I would like to,
with the real
and
yeah.
What we did see on Monday was that AI ethics. It would be interesting in Europe and to see what sort of copyright they're applying on some of those models and things like that. So that would be interesting.
Yeah.
So I'll reach out and do some investigation.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right, let's dive in. So what we're going to go through then just is some of the essential concepts of metadata. Anybody that's read through the DMBOK would be aware of them. But yeah, this is kind of what we'll touch on. So the first question obviously is the difference between data and metadata. And we do know that data refers to that raw information that is collected and stored. And the metadata is the data about it. So if I were to look at a customer record, I would see a field called name, but inside that name would be my name, Kennedy. So one is data, one is metadata, and kind of that's how we could differentiate on those things. This slide is actually, it's from a company called Atlan, which may help a little bit. So data used in discovering insights, metadata is helping to understand the data. Data may be of value. Sometimes metadata is always valuable. Data doesn't have to be processed before it's stored. Metadata is always stored as processed information. Data can be dependent on its type. Data admins can make metadata generic across the enterprise. And this blog is a piece of data. Metadata for the blog includes the author, the publisher, and the date. But yeah, that's very, very generic. I think most of us would understand the data. The differences, I think where it gets fun and games, Howard, and you would know this, is when we start talking about metadata and master data. But again, if I refer to the customer record, that is master data, and the metadata about it would be the field called name, the field called title, the field called gender, all of those things with a description.
Yep.
And categories of and types of metadata. We mainly talk about kind of the IT, the medical data, in when we're talking about this kind of metadata. So we'll have business metadata, we'll have operational metadata, we'll have technical metadata, there'll be social metadata and provenance metadata. And then when we start looking at information metadata, so this is more around books and content and all of that. We've got our descriptive metadata, we've got structural, and we've got admin metadata. in the past, we focused very strongly on this side of it, less so on that and not much on provenance, although the whole question now of data lineage and data observability and the need to be legally compliant, the provenance type metadata is arriving. The information stuff, yes, we've been aware of it from library catalogs and all of that, but I think more and more it's going to become an issue. There is a section in the DARMA on document and content management where we start to talk about it, but I think that the regulatory requirements around this side of things is definitely going to increase and become more onerous. So what we did say is that, yes. Yes.
When you say provenance and you spoke about legal, is that preservation metadata that you're referring to there?
Sorry, ask again, please.
Okay, you're calling it provenance. I understood
Lineage,
the DMBOK refers to it as preservation metadata. So what do you need to preserve when there's a legal hold on it? So that provenance is about the people you're getting the data from. Is that
on where it came from? Yeah. The way I interpret how it is it's also a term that comes out of the wine industry. Is so in which block on which hill did this grape grow in which year, and how did it get there? So I interpret it as being like a more expanded version of data lineage, but your provenance story, I think, is actually very valid, and I think your that might well come in amongst your information metadata, but I stand to correction.
okay? I'll just check quickly up on the DMBOK
preservation. Yeah. But that,
okay,
to me, that goes around. That also goes around your retention and archiving and that kind of stuff. But there was,
correct.
I think, somewhere I read or you mentioned, if there's a legal case, you may not destroy the data. And I can't actually remember the specific details. If you can find it, chip in.
Yeah, I can certainly share that with you. If there's and a lot of that preservation data, metadata, is agreements set up with yourself and other processing partners. And as soon as there's a legal query on a data set or documents, any document related to that legal query cannot be disposed or archived. So it has to remain in play. So the retention schedules aren't allowed to come into play when that happens. And that's sort of also part of allowing the legal people through e-discovery to find whatever data they require.
I'm just wondering how you would tag or classify that data as being preservation data, which you should actually do something like that in your metadata repository.
Yeah, sure. you would in your data catalog, in your metadata repository, as soon as there's some form of legal hold or legal query, then you'd need to find all the assets that relate to it and attach the preservation metadata to prevent it from being disposed or being tampered with or whatever, so you could be.
Yeah, so in your repository, you should also then create a flag that can say, yes, this is preservation data that's under preservation or not. So, I mean, I always thought of the other classifications, but yeah, that's a valid one. All right. So just very briefly again,
I think we've got one more hand up, Drew.
Yes.
We're not letting you get to your. Anyway, it's Bussy. Bussy's got a hand up. No problem.
Good afternoon.
Hi,
good
Bussy.
evening. Well, it's evening on my side, afternoon for you. So I just wanted to, because there's been quite a huge debate in our organization on the difference between data provenance and data lineage. And basically where we ended up, because this was in the context of exploring the use of AI using synthetic data and all of that. And basically where we ended up is that provenance is more of us being able to track the origin of the source, or the original sources of the data, the historical context, as well as the authenticity of the data. And the lineage was more being able to track then the movement and the transformation of the data through the various systems. So provenance we capture because we want to understand what's the original source of the data, and we are able to prove authenticity. What's happening?
Authenticity.
Sensitivity.
Yes.
Authenticity.
Yes,
Authenticity, not
of this
sensitivity.
data. Yes, of this data. Where's it coming from? The original source, we can capture that. But lineage, we're looking at it more from a perspective of what's the movement of the data, what transformation has been made, what changes were made. So that is how we captured the difference, and the management of it is then better understood as we understand what we look at from a provenance perspective and what we look at from a lineage perspective. Thought I could just share that.
I actually like that, because the data lineage would be captured within your operational method or your technical metadata, and the provenance probably more in the business glossary or in that kind of area. I like that. I'll do some work around. Yes, Howard.
So Drew, the actual origin of this provenance comes from the art world.
Is it art? I thought it was wine.
Yeah, so it's art, and the problem they had was that to detect whether the painting was a fake painting, a lot of the times they had to apply a physical touch to the painting, which degraded the quality of the painting. Now, what the work around that was to say, let's rather question where the painting came from rather than touching the painting. Okay. And then rate the people, whether it was a gallery or around the shop, a smos around the side. So what is the ranking of the individual or the organization where you got the data from? Now, that's been brought into a lot of quality metrics to be able to say, how well do we trust that organization to produce good quality, non-fake data? Because the data on its own, you will be hard pushed to prove that it doesn't meet the right quality requirements. So you add to that provenance. Now, there's also for Busi, if you'd like to look at the ISO 8000 part 120, it deals with provenance of master data. So that may help you. I don't know if you've referred to that, Busi.
Yes, we actually had looked at that as well.
Okay, but so yes, the provenance is about the source and details around the source and the credibility of the source. And you know, we sort of even seeing that in environments, government environments. There's two examples, ISTAT, and I'm hearing some talk in Saudi where they're saying they want a ranking of the person or the ministry that produces the data, and then that becomes part of the quality ranking of the data set and the trustworthiness of the data set.
Yeah.
Sure.
Interesting.
I wouldn't like to try and apply that ranking, but anyway.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do maturity rankings.
I think it's going to be about a maturity thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be about maturities and stuff like that.
Whether it's manual or automated and all of that good
and
stuff.
and then also what you're finding, Drew, is for example, blockchain, where they are putting diamonds, houses, things like that, where they're registering the asset on blockchain so that you can see the path that it's followed, what people did with it, and all that sort of detail.
Cool. All right, we try once more.
Yeah.
Okay, we know what business metadata is. It's really the content and the condition of the data, and it's those non-technical terms, and it's the definitions of concepts and of the subject areas, and it's a description of the entities and the properties and of the calculations and algorithms and business rules. And I have maintained before, it should be your business metadata sitting in maybe in a business glossary is the place people come to find out anything they need to know about what data there is, what the terms mean, how the calculations work, how long data should be there. It really is your go-to place, and it should be underpinned by your technical metadata, which is actually far more detailed about the data sitting in databases, in data stores, in data movement and everything else. And then obviously operational metadata is that data that says, okay, this file was extracted on this day, this time, this many records, and it was landed somewhere else, this date, this time, this many records, or it's the error logs, or it's the quality scores, it's all of that kind of stuff. But it's where you would go to check kind of the fit state of the data, having known what the term was, having known where it came from and where it went to. Some examples of metadata as well. So when you get your party master data, but there's metadata about all of these things normally in that CRM system. You got financial master data, but there would be metadata around all of these different categories of that financial data, as in with legal data and product data. I mean, one of the big things about product master data is if you don't have accurate metadata around it, you really could be in quite a lot of trouble, because it would also be where you're defining your quality requirements. And then other types of metadata. So yeah, we talked about provenance here, but I don't know how much it disagrees with what we were talking about now. So the data sources and ownerships and the transformations and fresh. So maybe I need to think or rethink this particular definition and put it in. But the other side also would be social and collaborative metadata. It's how people are democratizing their data with new data around things like chats and notes and tags and comments and glossaries and bookmarks and all of that kind of stuff. It's something we're going to see becoming kind of more and more pervasive, and it's data that the metadata that will need to be managed more and more. And it's a skill we're going to have to learn, because I don't think too many of us have that skill at the moment. I think a good example about metadata, and Howard, I lifted this off your presentation, so credit to you. I don't know where you lifted it from. I think out of the DM book.
That's actually right. I'll look for that.
From your course. Did you want it back?
No, thanks.
So if we were looking at reference data, and you know that data is reference data is about codes and descriptions that you use to standardize data across the org. So I mean, for instance, we'd say a formal name, and then it gives you a description of exactly what it was, like an ISO code, or the data provider would say who maintains that reference data. It would be the data set, or the source would tell you, and all of that. So this is a very good example of what metadata could look like, and this is probably fairly well prescribed, I guess, in some legal documentation, probably derived from something like the ISO 11179, which is the standard that is set for metadata, and it gives you a framework for defining and describing and managing those data elements. It gives you that common language and the methodology for governance of those, which is quite important. It helps to ensure consistency and accuracy and interoperability of the data across the different systems because of the standards. And it goes down to the data element definition, where you describe exactly the meaning and the purpose and the characteristics of that data element. And remember, an element is made up of attributes. So the element could well be customer, and it would be all of the attributes that make up that customer. It would be the relationship to other elements. It would be the usage where it gets used. It would be the quality of it and managing those requirements, accuracy and completeness and consistency. And it also have the life cycle for that element from creation to retirement. In terms of a deep dive into the registry naming guidelines, also from ISO 11179, they say that a good data definition should be unique. It must be distinguishable from every other definition in the registry. As well, it must be singularly, it must be positive, it must be a statement of concept, it must be defined with commonly understood abbreviations, and it must have without secondary definitions. And interesting enough, coming out of the uniqueness and the singularity is where a huge amount of the collaboration, discussion, negotiation all happened between data stewards, data owners, to come up with a unique definition for that data element, that data attribute. And very often we will see that I use the broad example of a sale. Yeah, everybody knows what a sale is, but then there's gross sales, there's net sales, there's markdown sales, there's 100 different ones, and you actually have to create and add sufficient information or explanation to make that unique and singular. I know that my friend Keith there does data quality. This is one of his challenges. People tell him to measure stuff and doesn't quite know which piece of it is. There are some other registry standards. One, if any of you are writing the metadata specialist exam, and I think it might come up even in the CDMP, is the Dublin Core metadata set, which was developed as a standard to describe any kind of resource, so text, image, audio, video, and software. And by the way, that is Dublin, Ohio, not Dublin, Ireland. Another one is this 19770, which is a guideline for managing records. There's another standard, the 2701, which is information security. There's a geographic one. There's an encoded one. There's the MARC, which is a machine readable catalog. So that's for bibliography and that kind of stuff. XML, which is something more and more that's being used as data has been shipped back and forth across different landscapes and stuff because it is self-describing. There's the RDF. Howard, you could probably comment on this. I'm not the data modeling expert. There's the XMP standard and there's the MOD standard. So interesting enough, there's a whole bunch. As part of defining your strategy and your requirements and deciding on your solution, you would need to decide on a registry standard. But I think most of the commercially available tools would adhere very closely to the ISO 11179.
Drew, you also got something called FAIR. I know John O'Gorman has been talking about it a bit as well on LinkedIn. So FAIR is almost elevating your metadata up to the same level as your data. So and there's a whole lot of standards there as well in terms of making sure that every element has a unique ID and it's registered and that. So yeah, ISO 11179, a lot of that thinking has been now brought into the FAIR standard as well. So the data is findable, accessible, so that's how they go about. John, I know John's on the line. John, I saw a few quotes from you on LinkedIn. Is that correct? Did I get it wrong?
No, that's right. So fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And yeah, I think these standards and the FAIR kind of principles are converging quite nicely.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Definitely will include that. Now that you mention it, I do vaguely remember hearing about it, but when you get to mind, you forget things.
Slides on it, Drew. I've got some slides if you'd like to. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we were talking about all the different standards. We'll add FAIR at the top here. But when you come to apply your standards, we're saying that the solution that you choose, probably the tool set, whatever else, it should adhere to agreed upon internal and external standards. Internal standards, I think, are fairly simple to define. The external standards probably would come about if there's legal compliance required or anything else. And you could follow the naming conventions. You could make sure that you handle any custom attributes. Make sure of your security or visibility and your whole processing documentation. And if you're looking at external standards, is what is those data exchange formats and what are the API designs, and how do you make sure that your data is that data that should be accessible is accessible in a consistent format by using that metadata. When we look at metadata for the unstructured side, and we touched on it ever so briefly, so there is the concept of the descriptive stuff, which describes the resource and identifies the for ease of retrieval. So it would be the title and the author and the subject and a catalog. Structural metadata would be the relationship within that resource, a number of pages, number of chapters and tags and field structures. The admin data would use to manage the resources over their life cycle for the source and update schedules and version numbers and the archive dates and all the rest. We mentioned the bibliographic metadata, which is your library catalogs, the record keeping metadata, which is retention policies, and preservation metadata, which is storage and archival conditions and rules for conservation, which is what you mentioned earlier, Howard. So that would be the rule for conservation because of whatever that preservation requirement is. And interesting enough, if you look in the DMBOK chapter 9, page 331, there's a whole thing about content metadata and the recommendations, record management side. But the metadata for unstructured data content is based on the format. It should dictate the method to access that data. It should ensure that searchability, whether the tools already exist or do you need to create it. Hopefully there's a bit of self-documentation, whether the metadata is like a file system or existing tool. Can you adopt existing patterns like a catalog? The content subjects, things that are people likely to looking for, make sure you capture all of that. And there's definitely a need for thoroughness and detail in retrieval as part of your requirements. But again, we probably refer to in another day, we can go through the records management, because that's a whole chapter on itself, as is content and documents. So interesting enough as well, we talked about metadata and all the different types of metadata, but these, in my opinion, are all the places where you could or should be able to find metadata. So in your application metadata repository, so that would come with your ELP system, or it would come with whatever else. You find metadata in the glossary. Obviously, it gets added in there. We get provided. You definitely can find metadata in your BI tooling, probably in the ETL tooling as well. The CMDBs, configuration management databases, there would be a lot of metadata in there around probably physical assets and more of the really technical operational side of things. Your data dictionaries that would come with packages, for sure, it's got a lot of technical metadata, probably not too much business metadata, but it's going to have a lot of technical. Your integration tools and APIs, you can look to those for metadata. Database management systems, data modeling and mapping tools, event messaging tools. I think some of the SOA architectures would do that. I've got it twice, sorry. Reference data repositories, service registries, cloud platforms, spatial data, digital graphic data, BI tools, and the business rules. This is all the places where you can find metadata, and there probably are others, like data lakes and other areas as well. And then based on all of that, and based on what we discussed earlier, that leads us into the idea of the metadata architecture. Obviously, like anything else in the need to be architected. If you don't architect something, chances of building it correctly are going to be very, very low. So the things that you need to take into account for the architecture is that metadata has a life cycle. it gets drafted, it gets loaded, it gets validated, it gets accessed, and it probably gets, at some point in time, retired. So the activities would be the creating and the sourcing. Where did it come from? Who did it? What are the rules? Where does it get stored? How does it get integrated? How does it get delivered? How does it get used? And then very much the control and the management side. The flow of the data, the trustworthiness, the availability, the security, and all of that good stuff. So in line with that, there are actually 3, but kind of 4 types of metadata architecture. There's a centralized version, there's a distributed version, and there's a bit of confusion about whether it's a hybrid or bidirectional, but I'm going to cover centralized, distributed, and hybrid. This EIM Institute has got a really nice article around the different metadata architectures. So if you remember correctly, we spoke a little bit earlier around all the different data sources. So there's your BI tools, there's your modeling tools, there's your ETL. What happens with the centralized metadata architectures? You have a metadata portal, you have your repository, and the metadata from all of these disparate systems gets pulled into this repository where it is accessible from the portal itself. And in some instances, you can push metadata back down, back to the tool sets. So the distributed metadata architecture, and a lot of the big money item metadata tools would have this kind of architecture. The distributed architecture, which is a little bit more simple, where you have the portal, but you don't have the repository, and from the portal, you can directly interrogate any one of these sources. The beauty of this one is that you're always looking at the latest version. The challenge you've got with the centralized metadata architecture, if you've got something like a data lake that is constantly receiving new data and you do not have a regular harvesting of that data to load into the enterprise repository, it can very quickly end up out of date. And then the hybrid one, it is a portal with a repository, but it's simply one way. What I have got in readable, but you guys will get the slides. So the centralized one, the beauty is it's highly available and very quick. It's not affected by third-party systems, and the extracted metadata can be transformed and customized and enhanced with data that doesn't reside in that source system. So disadvantage there is it's complex process to ensure that the changes in the source data are quickly replicated, and it's a lovely spelling mistake. As I mentioned, the data lake, if you are not harvesting on a regular basis, it can quickly get out of date, and it can be quite costly because of all the processes that need to run. You might need some custom code in some instances, and the validation and maintenance of that code is quite a big job on the staff and or on the vendor. The distributed side it's always current and valid because you're reading it from the source, so the performance is good, a much simpler processing and maintenance effort. The development of queries, minimal intervention and reduced batch as there's no replication or synchronization. The disadvantage is that you cannot actually add user-defined or manually inserted metadata because you can't push it down. There's no standardized metadata from various systems. You're looking at the data as it exists in that system. The query capability could be impacted if that system is down, stands to reason. And the quality is solely dependent on that participating source system. When you come to the hybrid one, again, the metadata is always current and valid. You get good query performance because you've got near real time. Enhanced metadata can be added. The lower manual intervention and custom code, less and no replication or synchronization. And the disadvantages is the availability of the source systems as happened here. Additional overhead to link initial results to augmentation, no user-defined or inserted metadata, which I think is a major problem there and there, because this is where you can really add value when you get your stewards and your business users involved with adding to that value, because often that data would have been sourced from a operational system, and then you want to tie it all together. Any questions about that other than my spelling mistakes? Howard, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, I actually wanted Veronica. I'm not sure if she's on the line, but if you go back to that slide, that sort of
This one?
yeah, the hybrid. It's sort of the slides or the pictures don't make much sense. I know Veronica, you worked on that. Veronica,
yes.
what?
Yes. The DMBOK version 3 said there was a mistake. And then the version 3 revised, they said they fixed it, but they didn't. That
Version
first
2,
one that
version
Drew's
2
got
revised.
a version 2 revised. That first one that Drew's got as centralized is actually the hybrid. Another the
Yeah,
bidirectional. It's the bidirectional.
Yeah.
They didn't have a picture for hybrid. They had it in the version 3 non-revised. They had this hybrid
2.
thing. And that one that's got theirs hybrid is actually the centralized.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will change that. That makes sense.
And they
I'll fix that.
didn't. And that's why I made funnies with my slides. I put little things in and I just say that it
Yeah.
made no sense to me when I tried to explain these. They don't make any sense. They, you look at them and you blow bubbles. And once I realized that the arrows were misplaced, as what they said on the website, these are the corrections they've made. And they said they changed the arrows on the centralized and the bidirectional, and they didn't. But then when I realized they were supposed to be changed, it made more sense. So this one that's hybrid is centralized because we replicate from the tools into the repository. And
Yes.
the bidirectional is supposed to be it's interacting with the tools.
Yeah, you can take it both ways.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll make changes to that in any case. But then it
And
probably
then
also
Drew?
makes a mockery of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just check the slides that are updated for the metadata chapter in the course.
I'll do that.
Thanks.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Howard, yes?
And then what you'll see there, Drew, is that you've sort of got, if you go back to the diagram, you can see down at the bottom there's like a meta model and a unified meta model by tool type, right? So you've got a BI standardized meta model that all tools should export to. And then you've got this thing, and then what you do is you can build a unified meta model that links the data that goes from the ETL to the BI tool to the data application. So that's also part of that unification of that meta model.
Okay. I'll make those changes in any case.
You'll
It makes sense.
notice that there's a unified meta model in the deliverables of the context diagram.
I did see that. Thank you for that.
Cool.
Okay, when we've gone through then the models, the other side that we'll just touch on is the strategy. And for me, the metadata strategy and the metadata requirements have to go hand in hand. I don't honestly believe that you can build a strategy if you do not know what the requirements are. And I believe that to embark on any metadata program without having the strategy that supports the data governance strategy, the data management strategy, and the data strategy would also be really looking for trouble. But basically what you would do in your strategy is you're deciding how that organization wants to manage its data and how it's going to move to the future state. So typically you would have done a metadata maturity assessment to have a feel for that. And it's going to give you that framework for improving the metadata management. And it will clarify the drivers of the strategy and also potential obstacles. And it defines that future state of the enterprise metadata architecture and would help you with your implementation phases. cannot stress enough how important this is. And I think we can talk about that a little bit more next week as well, if the opportunity arises. Mentioned earlier as well the requirements about the who, the what, the where, and the why, how. So we're asking about who created that data. So obviously your meta model needs to be able to handle that, and you need to be capturing that. Who's the steward? That is a requirement. You need to be able to capture that. Who's using the data? All of these things need to be considered when you build your meta model, or when you build when you roll out your metadata repository or metadata system. Added to that is the whole idea of the functional requirements. So how often and when are you going to do the updates related to source system changes? Do we need to keep history of versions of the metadata? Do we need to keep up to date with the volatility of the metadata, or can we, for instance, just say, right, once a week we'll update it, once a day we'll update it? The access rights, who can access it, who can update it, and do they do it via which UI, which portal? How will you model this thing? The amount of integration from the different sources, plus the rules for that integration. I mean, if you're pulling data from a whole bunch of stuff and you're pulling metadata from a whole bunch of stuff, how do you integrate it? Kind of thing, which becomes the master. It talks to those questions about the naming conventions. How do you make it unique? And then there's a whole process of and the rules for updating metadata. Who can load metadata? Who can sign it off? Who can update it? It's a critical component, and I think that's where a hell of a lot of the collaboration needs to happen. That you don't have somebody overwriting somebody else's changes, especially if they're not correct. The quality requirements are so fundamental. I cannot stress it enough. You cannot work with dirty data, and you cannot work with dirty, incorrect, incomplete, inaccurate metadata. It is one of those paramount things that have to be in place. And then security, some metadata should not be exposed if it reveals protected data. Maybe that goes some way to that question about the IP. Maybe some of those models that we were talking about, or some of those data products we were talking about, are that confidential. So they shouldn't be described in too much detail in the metadata platform. And if they are, they should have restricted access that people can't get to them and expose them. Once you've done our requirements, we need to consider how to do the meta model, and how are you talking about the meta model and the unified meta model. So I think in this instance, we are talking about the meta model at a more generic level, where you have your high level conceptual model, which explains the relationships between the systems. The lower level meta model would be the attributes and elements and the processes, and it needs to cater for logical and physical, architecture, business and technical, glossary and glossary terms. It would look something like this. So there's your logical data. You've got a data model with entities and attributes. You would have your physical data, so your data store, your file table, your file and field columns. Over here, you'd have your business glossary and your glossary term, supported by technical metadata, which would be the business value, the code set, the codified domain, and then from the architecture side, your system and your application. So that is pretty much what I had decided, or what I thought fit to cover today. There are some other, again, there would be the deliverables, the strategy, the standards, architecture, the meta model, the unified meta model, the data stores. We didn't talk too much about that. We didn't talk about Lineage. But maybe what I'll do next week when we do the for the exec side, we would look a little bit more at the high level requirements, we'd look a little bit more at the strategy and the strategy and the rollout and the ROI and that sort of thing. So yeah, with that, are there any questions, comments, suggestions? And can I stop sharing my slide?
No, Drew, just,
No.
I got a question there, but Bussi's got a hand up. So Bussi, would
Again.
your question? Yeah, if you can leave it there, Drew.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask, so for a team that's just starting off with metadata management and wanting to put it in place in an organization, what would your pointers be in terms of, one, how do they start articulating the value of having metadata management in the organization? And then two, what are some of the quick wins? I know business glossary is one of the quick wins, but what would you say are the fast wins that can start showing value to the business?
So, Busi, you could come at that from two sides, or maybe even more than two sides, but the one side that would come, especially for an organization, I don't know where you are, but if that organization has gone down the path of starting to use data lakes and data reservoirs and all sorts of stuff where there's a lot of data landing and that data is then being used to augment other data to create data products and stuff, and very often it's done in an agile fashion. The amount of time that people are spending trying to find the right data and checking that it's correct, the amount of money that it's costing companies when they build a data product with data that is flawed because it hasn't all landed or they've used the wrong data. You could start with something like that. You only need one or two of those use cases to very quickly justify the starting of a metadata program. There's been instances where people have started to monetize data products and then find out that through a lack of knowledge, either they are using the wrong data to create that product, they're using incorrect data, so it becomes a quality issue as well. If you had the metadata in place and you were building a data product, you would know what the quality rules are and you could check that. You could get your data engineers to check that for you and you could get your data scientists to check that. And when they create their data products or their models or whatever else, they should the policy should say those things have to be captured in the metadata repository as well. The other side of things is typically to align with the business vision. It could be generic terms like precision retail or customer centricity or something like that. So one of the subject areas that are core to the business and say, right, can we drive out the glossary for that? Can we drive out then the catalog for that? Then can we start doing kind of the logical and physical side for that? So then you get an owner on board who values data, values the importance of using data correctly, and is prepared to lend some commitment to that. What I'm definitely do not recommend is doing a shotgun approach, saying, "Right, we're going to ingest all the data that we've got in our lake and we're going to do that," because you're never going to see the benefit. But if you can hone it down to one of your data domains, to typically you'll find somebody in the business that is an evangelist for data and would buy into the concept of metadata management to enhance the quality and the master and the reference and everything else. But definitely you could do it based on one, how much time is it taking, how much duplication of data is there in the lake, because people don't know the data is there, they can't find it, they're simply adding another data set and another data set. The cost of cloud storage these days, AWS storage and others, I believe is becoming eye-watering. And if you've got the same data duplicated 4, 5, 6 times, it's frightening. So a metadata initiative could highlight where you've got duplication in the lake because the same data is landed 4 times. It could probably pay for the project already. Any other comment, Howard?
Drew, I fully agree with what you're saying, but One of the ways I like to do it before discussing technical issues is, let's come back to the root element of metadata, and the purpose is for us to understand our data.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest challenges we have is lack of common understanding. And Drew keeps talking about how important the glossary is. So it's actually quite easy when you can demonstrate to your executives how different the understanding is just on your KPIs. You know, take your KPIs, take your master data, and people will have 4 different understandings of what they mean, how they calculate it, and what the understanding is of those terms. So that's been always for me been a very powerful way of demonstrating how important that metadata is. And so that is critical. Now, what we're also finding to deal with what Drew was talking about is those data catalogs are almost becoming the centralized or the hybrid meta model, the metadata repository, the consolidated metadata repository. So you're finding that they are bringing the whole world together in these data catalog tools. But you know, as Drew says, you load up too much and it's not controlled and you're not structured, then you're going to have a mess sitting in that catalog. But stick to, we need common understanding. And if there is a pain in terms of the cost of storage, then that's when your catalog starts become a powerful discussion about the value of metadata.
Yeah, Howard, you can also use the idea of if you hone in on a particular domain and then identify those critical data elements that are
Yeah,
top of the pops in that domain and start looking at
yeah,
all of the aspects of it, the master data, the data
yeah,
quality and the privacy and the security, whatever else. If you're going to pay that much attention to managing those critical data elements, then it
yeah,
kind of
Drew.
makes sense to say manage them.
Yeah, what I was trying to, I think it's the first step you got to do is convince the executives that you have a need for metadata. There's a problem, and then it's about the roadmap. So for me, it's, do you have a powerful enough argument to convince them that they have a problem and they got to do something about it, and then what's the potential ROI? And then look at, well, what makes sense in terms of rollout path. Busi, does that help you?
Yeah. Thank you so much. It helps.
Great. I think Di's got a hand up. Di, maybe you wanted to answer some of that?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Another great session. And thank you, Howard. I think what this resonates with me is that data literacy is a fundamental requirement in all of our organizations. And data literacy being understanding what the data means and how people in the organization can communicate with each other. Yeah, that's just my tuppence halfpenny worth. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it is about, you know, common understanding. I think we fall over ourselves regularly in that area.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think go Di.
Yeah, sorry, Drew. I think it's about how people in the organization communicate with each other, and how do they do that without metadata? It's impossible. Yeah. So we've got to get it out there. But it's about communication of between people in the organization, and that's where metadata can the initial place where metadata can help us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry, Drew.
Di, that's one of the reasons why I prefer to talk about a business glossary and a data catalog and not metadata as such. And you know, I'm would love to find somebody that would buy into my idea of using the business glossary as an induction tool and using the business glossary as a training tool and replacing 15 million glossary of terms in 120,000 program specs was appointed to the business glossary. Just for me, it seems to be blindingly obvious, but I'm missing something.
I think
Well,
our
Drew,
challenge.
there's actually Steve Hoberman talks of, and the way I liked it, he built subject area models and conceptual models that had all the definitions of the business, of the core business concepts, and then used that as a navigation map as they used it as part of induction. So as part of M&M, they actually used his high-level models to introduce and explain data to people that were joining. So it's been done.
I love it. I love it. I love it. But I've not found
He
anybody
said,
locally.
you know what he
who
said
buy it.
was amazing, Drew. He said he built this whole enterprise data model 12, 15 years ago. The only thing that remains is his induction program around the core business concepts.
I see Keith has
Keith.
got his hand up there. Yeah, good. Here comes trouble.
No. So just a quick one on my side. So if you starting a metadata practice from scratch, and like what Busi said, the quick win being a business glossary, does DAMA provide a guideline as to who needs to capture those business terms? Is it data stewards, or can the data governance admin team assist with capturing those terms? Thanks.
Okay, my take on it would be that it absolutely has to be the data stewards. The data governance team will not, unless they've come out of business, will not be au fait with those business terms and what they mean and how they get used and what the different nuances are. The governance team, the metadata team, can definitely help by, for instance, giving them a template that they could fill in and then loading. But no, they would not. I can't see that a data governance team would have that knowledge. They would not understand what a term like you would remember that one, Keith. What does ranging mean? As a governance person, you've got no idea what ranging means. You've got no idea what assortment planning means. You've got no idea what replenishment means, because it's not something that's core. You understand things like attributes and entities and quality scores and all the rest, but the business people have to provide you with that. And then maybe the governance team can map that against the physical data that's sitting in the catalog and that comes from the data dictionaries. Howard, Guy?
Yeah. So Keith, I'd love to, and I'm just going to take a brief moment to share with you a course that I did, and it's called Writing Business Definitions. And here is the process of writing the business definitions and then understanding relationships between the terms, and things like that. Now, what they taught as well, which I found extremely helpful, is building a community of interest, first of all, of the SMEs that are excited or see it and have to provide you input. But so what they do, Keith, is that they show you how to go away and do some research on terms and then suggest and break it up into those, what we call the dictionary, and then get the SMEs to break it up into those classification elements. So sorry, I stopped there, but the process is something like this. I'll just share that with you. And so that's the final definition. And so there, as an example, is what a premium looks like. Okay, and you can see the different ways in which business uses a premium. Okay, now what you're wanting to do is first of all go to a dictionary definition. This is what the dictionary uses, and then have that being highlighted using a coloring system like this in terms of how from the different definitions, these are the possible definitions, and then you work with the business person to get that right definition. So you can help them and you can do some initial investigation, but you're wanting them to take the final say, as Drew says. But you can also help them with giving them a technique and creating people that are the authors and the controllers of the terminology in your library. Keith, does that give you some idea on how you should handle this diction or this glossary development?
Yeah, no, I'm very satisfied. If you can share that slide, I'd be
Sure.
really excited. Thanks.
Okay. Di?
Hi again, and just to maybe add to what you've said, Howard, and to respond to Keith, for me, it's about the what and the how. So the what we're good at, but the how takes a little bit of change management. And how, Keith, are you going to get that message out to your people? To make them aware of the business glossary and the induction process and that awareness. So I would just like you to think of that maybe as well. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Drew.
Great.